Today, we often give up our personal information without a second thought. With each survey we answer, photo we post, or email address we provide, we give a piece of ourselves in return for something we deem valuable. Incognito Mode asks participants to engage with the transactional nature of our interactions with machines and with each other. It does this by asking increasingly revealing questions to the participant. In return, it promises to give the responses of a previous participant, but only to the questions the participant chooses to answer. This give-and-take dynamic is also an exercise in social dynamics and psychological behavior. Does the incentive of learning about other participants encourage the participant to be more truthful? Do the answers that one chooses to answer change depending on the context in which the piece is presented?
Early on, we decided we wanted to incorporate the receipt printer as a way of alluding to the idea of transactional relationships. A very important experiential consideration was the type of questions we asked, as well as their progression. Some questions are simple to answer, such as what is your birthday? But others, such as what is your most terrible memory, might draw a pause if presented early on. With this in mind, we began with straightforward questions, ramping up to more probing questions that a participant might be more willing to answer after becoming more comfortable with the experience. We wanted to design a digital interface that evoked a feeling of interacting directly with the machine and software without any overhead. To do so, we looked towards terminal aesthetic interfaces that are often related with programming and low-level machine interaction. We wanted the participant to feel as if they were interacting with a computer terminal.
The engineering for the project was relatively straightforward. We created a web front-end and connected it to a Flask Python backend and a MongoDB database to store each user's responses and questions. The most technically unfamiliar part of the project was interfacing with an off-the-shelf thermal printer. For this, we used a Python library that allowed us to communicate directly to the device. In the future, we're interested in displaying this piece in different contexts with different questions to see how participants might change their responses.
So how did you feel about the installation?
I liked it. It kind of got personal at times, but it was kind of cool because I felt like it was this collective personal journey that everyone had been a part of before.
I really liked it. I found it very powerful. You're used to answering questionnaires online and they're so impersonal and you have no emotional involvement. But knowing someone would get my responses and also knowing that it would come out in physical form, I thought was really interesting and heightening experience.
The design of the space was very intimate. You kind of come into this, this room with this like strong drone-like sound, and you're the only person in this room. So it creates a very sort of intimate setting. So that was the first thing that sort of came to me. Was I was really impressed by how the architecture and the mood of the space really influenced how I felt as I was going into this.
There's a time where it was like, like most online username, birth date, where I was like, this is kind of like, this is like, could easily be like identity theft.
I had like a mix of different emotions. The first thing was, for some reason I had this like strong urge to respond to things very honestly. And I kind of felt like there was this implicit trust in terms of like, this information is being shared with someone else in this class, and I wanted to kind of give them an accurate picture or something like that. And so there was a sense of like being slightly vulnerable. However, the way it was staged was like the first questions were really straightforward stuff, like what's your name, what's your birthday, and things that like really almost take no thought to answer. And so it kind of like gets you a little bit more comfortable with the sort of disorienting setup of the space. And then it sort of gradually steps you into these like slightly more personal questions. And when I came to those, I started realizing, started thinking about like, do I feel comfortable sharing this? Who's going to see this? I know that another person is going to see this, but is this data being collected? And eventually I realized, and that made me like calibrate like what I feel comfortable sharing and what I don't.
And this tension between like one just wanting to be honest and open, but then not wanting people to know certain things about me, but then also wanting to know the answers of other people. So it was hard to juggle the two, and it created this tension.
And then I definitely got to being like, ever been in love, and then for me it was like, well, what is love? Have I been in love? And I question this a lot myself. How do you want to die, or do you have a hunch on how you'll die? I was like, oh boy, I don't know. So a lot of it you almost had to. Some of the answers you had to sort of create on the fly. Because I never really thought out how I wanted that. But other things like, what's something you've dreamt of for a long time? That's something that's easy to kind of answer.
What was your reaction when the receipt printer started printing and you started reading someone else's response?
It was kind of funny because I knew the person and I knew the people he was talking about in his response. So I felt like I gained like this very intimate view into his life, and I discovered things that I don't think he would have told me if I'd asked him straight out. But now I know about it, and it's really funny that he doesn't know that I know.
So it so happened that the person whose receipt I got also answered the questions very honestly. And it was just like a beautiful, first of all, just the act of like crossing it and signing it felt very meaningful, and the output felt like a very personal, like a secret, and we don't really have secrets with strangers in our world as a thing, you're guarded about your privacy. And this felt a little bit like sharing a secret with a stranger, and they don't even know that you're sharing that, so there's a little bit of something a little uncomfortable and interesting about that asymmetry there. But I really enjoyed reading through the answers of this person who answered everything like very honestly and sincerely, and it was like slightly funny, it was slightly vulnerable, and it was a lot, even the answers that were very short, like, well, I shouldn't talk about them, so I'm not going to. But answers to questions like, have you ever fallen in love, to be very short, and that a short answer to that question like leaves a lot unsaid. So there was a lot of weightiness to this document, even though it wasn't very verbose, which is really cool.